When Aaron Copland wrote this piece, Fanfare for the Common Man, he must have been truly inspired. And, it's a very inspiring piece. And from the moment I was introduced to it and heard it was many years ago as a young man, I've always listened to it and tried to hear it when it's been on, because it is such an inspiring piece. And I think the man who wrote the piece, Aaron Copland, was obviously very inspired about the situation. And and I was listening to the groups of trumpet calls, and I was listening within the trumpet to the groups, how many calls there was, and you could almost identify 7 definite different calls there. And what that reminded me of was the book of Revelation, which talks about the various trumpet calls to the nations at the end time. And when you read that and the various calls, you start to understand how inspiring that is as well. But the thing is about those calls is what is going to happen. But what I'd like to deal with here is something that few people seem to appreciate, and that is that the Bible is not a myth. And you get these experts coming up, whether it be Dawkins or various other people down the ages that I've listened to, who've said that the Bible is wrong for this or that reason, only to be proven wrong themselves when those things that they said were not there. Kathleen Kenyon was one that comes to mind, who said that the walls of Jericho fell 400 years before the Bible says, therefore the Bible was wrong. And she was a well-known archaeologist. She seems to spend a lot of time trying to disprove the Bible, not actually prove it. But there we are, that was her way. And of course another man came along, another archaeologist, a couple of years later, and he said, oh well, you're wrong, Kathleen, because she'd already passed away at that stage. Kathleen Kenyon was wrong. She'd been digging in the wrong section. Now, so what made sense to me was that if you're going to find the most recent artifacts, you'll go into those areas where there's wealth, because they'll have a lot more money to spend. But what she was doing was digging in the very poor section of that city, and of course they didn't find these things. But they found them in the wealthy section, in that area under the wall, which they found. And of course the amazing thing is everything that the Bible says you'd find in that city was found. The fact that none of the grains had been removed, they were still in their warehouses. In those days, unlike today I suppose, but in those days, grain like that was worth a lot of money, especially to people who was coming out of the desert. And there was another man who got up and said the Bible is wrong. There's no such thing as the Hittite Empire. And that went on and on for for quite a bit of time, until of course they found the capital and the Hittite Empire, which was apparently even bigger than the Assyrian Empire, because the Assyrian Empire had 20,000 tablets, records in it, and the Hittite Empire had something like 40 or 60,000. It was a tremendous number, which also included the tablets from King Tutankhamun's sister, who after his death was writing to the Hittite king asking for the hand in marriage of one of her sons, because she didn't want to marry her servant, and her servant was which apparently was the man who could have murdered her husband brother, because that's what they did, the sisters and brothers married in those days. And but as it was, she was forced to marry and then she just disappeared from the scene, and continued to be Pharaoh, because he needed her for the credibility to become Pharaoh. So the Bible is not wrong. And I can mention things like rivers under the sea that we only found in 1960 with Jacques Cousteau going down the Bath Escape, Trieste, down to the bottom of the Atlantic. We only found them then, and yet the Bible in the book of Job mentions it very clearly. We only found the what we call smokers. Heaven forbid we actually called it what the Bible did 1,000 years ago, fountains of the deep. We only found them 20, 30 years ago in the 1970s by complete accident. Yet the Bible was mentioning it in 2 or 3 places 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 years ago. The fact that the Pleiades up there were gravitationally attracted stars was known in the Bible eons ago. And we only found that out comparatively recently. We only found out about the trying to think what it was again. For instance, the headwaters of the Amazon River are called Solomon. That is because Solomon, in actual fact, helped finance the expeditions to South America, where all the gold came from, and we got the gold from South America as well. That's how we found America. And when the conquistadors went there, but they didn't use gold that much themselves because they used other things, metal. They didn't have swords. They didn't have anything else like that down there. So when we look at the Bible and people say it is a myth, ask this question of yourself: how did the Bible get it so right when the scientists got it wrong about another 2 or 3 things? For instance, the number of stars in the skies. Kepler and then Ptolemy mentioned that there was 1,000 or 2,000 stars up there, and the Bible said there's as many stars as there are sands on the beach, uncountable numbers, etc. And now, of course, we find that there are uncountable numbers up there, as the Bible said. And what about the scientific knowledge right the way through the ages that the oceans were shallow and sandy bottomed? And we only found out literally when we were dropping cables down there, horror upon horrors, the cables just kept on going down, thousands and thousands of feet. And there was canyons down there and everything like that, and great mountain ranges. The Bible got it right. It said actually that was the situation. Now what about quarantine? We only found quarantine out late in the Middle Ages, yet the Bible had mentioned it all that time back in Moses about the camps and how you quarantine people away from the majority of the people. Quarantine was a treatment that we lost again, and it's like when the Roman Empire collapsed. They had invented steam engines in Alexandria, and the man who invented them took them to the emperor, and the emperor was so unimaginative. He said, "What am I going to do with all my slaves?" And he just didn't understand how significant that invention was. They had double glazing, they had central heating, they had hot and cold running water, they had sewage systems. None of the Middle Age houses had any of them. So we lost a lot of information, and yet it's all there. What we are doing is, I would say that YouTube has put some tremendous stuff together here, or people have put a lot of stuff on YouTube, but YouTube has done a tremendous job here in allowing this to happen. And it's, to me, look, I'm 66, and I can tell you I have never seen anything like it, where you can see such fascinating stuff and hear such fantastic music and see such tremendous things. And what we've done up there is try to gather a lot of the stuff that I found is very important from YouTube. And so if you want to, please visit our site there. It's free. Thank you very much for listening to me.